My role is simply to state how very, very pleased we are as RLUK to be working with the Arts Humanities Research Council and the evidence team from Birmingham City University around this important research study. I suspect that we're singing to the choir this afternoon in terms of the recognition, understanding and ambition for many of the delegates to this conference to see growth and impact from the many collaborations between researchers and research libraries. This research is designed to let us really understand what's happening, what the possibilities are and the barriers are. So I'd urge as many as possible to get involved. The survey, I think we'll hear more about as we go through this session, remains open and will be reposted again, so you can contribute to it as well as the Mentimeter. And I'm also absolutely delighted that along with the research, so the evidence-based team and representatives from the AHRC, we have today two fantastic members from RLUK institutions, Christopher Presler from Manchester and Darryl Green from Edinburgh, who will share their experiences and we will learn from those. So take part, really important piece of work about reshaping scholarship and the role of research libraries. Thank you.
What I would like to do next is obviously one of the things that we're looking at and we're very keen to include in the report is a number of case studies. And we thought we would start as we mean to go on in that sense. And I'd now like to introduce Professor Christopher Presler, who is University Librarian at the John Rylands at the University of Manchester. And I believe that Chris will give you a very interesting case study of a library within an institute and an institute within the library. I think the clue is in the title, as they say. Chris, over to you and welcome.
Thank you, David. Can I just check that you can hear me okay? Can people hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Chris.
Yeah, oh, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, we can.
Thank you, Matt. First of all, thank you, David, for that kind introduction. Can I take this opportunity for those of you who may have glimpsed what I'm wearing, as an Irishman, to wish everyone the very best on St. Patrick's Day, and particularly to those colleagues who I know are on the call from my previous colleagues in Ireland. I've got a green tie and a green neckerchief on specifically for today, so the very best to all of you and the very best for the future. Thank you for this opportunity to talk a little bit about the John Rylands Research Institute and Library. Many of you may have seen on Twitter that last week we relaunched the John Rylands Research Institute and Library as a single entity, and I'll be talking a little bit about that this afternoon. The Rylands, as we use in shorthand, is intended to promote research in the humanities and sciences using our own special collections at the University of Manchester. Many of our colleagues work across the world and indeed in many of your libraries as well, but principally the Institute is funded by the university to work on our own collections. For those of you who've been to the John Rylands Library itself, you'll know that it is one of the finest, in fact some of us think it is the finest, neo-Gothic building in Europe, on Deansgate, right in the heart of Manchester. I think it's important for us to take this opportunity just to show a little bit about the scale of the operation at the University of Manchester. The Institute and Library in total totals 202 staff. There's obviously a core staff there, but also many others working alongside us in terms of scholarship and library practice. And that covers a number of different areas of expertise, from researchers, librarians, curators, archivists, conservators, digital developers, and one of our most important teams, our imaging specialist team. And perhaps these numbers may seem quite large to some of you. I think it's really important that I'm able to say from experience of working in smaller institutions, much smaller institutions actually, that many of the practices that we operate at the John Rylands are easily translatable to different sizes of institutions. It's all about defining the partnerships correctly. The point of this slide really is to say that yes, the collections are important, but the people are just as important. and building a community of expertise and a community of scholarship in the way that Manchester has managed to do over the last few years, perhaps is the key to some of this. And it's certainly the key to us delivering our core mission, which are some big words here in terms of defining our core, defining the human experience. Over 5 millennia and up to the present day, and we use that length of time obviously because of the differences in our collections. A quick slide on governance. This is John Rylands himself. A quick slide on governance. We have shared directorships now between the library and the Institute. Professor Hannah Barker, who's Professor of British History at the University of Manchester, and myself in terms of being University Librarian. We have an International Advisory Board, a steering committee and a management group, and these are aligned internally, if this is helpful in terms of setting this kind of thing up in other institutions, with our own library team, humanities leadership team, and the University of Manchester Research Institutes Board, which represents all 23 research institutes in all disciplines across the institution. We have hundreds of centres, but only 23 research institutes. So it shows the recognition given to this area of work by the university. Our activity is meant to be a catalyst for the research in our university. And as I've suggested, this is not just in the wider humanities, but also in medicine. We have one of our, for instance, our colour conservator has been working with some of our medics on thinking through the links that can be found using MRI scans through illuminated manuscripts and understanding colour there, which has been a really interesting project for us to work with. Perhaps not one that the university may have thought that the special collections team would be working with the School of Medicine, but it shows you where these kind of journeys can take you. We hope that what we do incorporates all new approaches in DH and in curation, as well as the scientific techniques needed to study and conserve heritage materials. And of course, if there's a theme to this talk at all, it's really about collaboration and partnership, and how closely our body of academics work with our team in the library, not just thinking about how our profession can, or various professions can develop, but also nurturing the next generation of scholars. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. We do want to open up our special collections. That's the driving force for the Institute. It's not about pure research for research's sake. It is definitely about making that accessible. And we have a number of audiences that we talk to there. Excuse me. Our collections, I think, are fair to say, are world leading in their significance and diversity. As I've said before, they cover around 5,000 years of human history. We're very fortunate to care for some of the most significant items in any library in the world. And we believe that these collections underpin the library's status as genuinely one of the great libraries of the world in one of the world's leading research intensive universities. The library itself contains around 10 million items, and I'm not going to name those top 5. If we were in a normal conference, we might have a guess as to which they are, but we won't go down that road now. But it's just to make the point that what we're caring for and what we're able to provide access to is genuinely important. So why an institute and a library? The institute's existed for a number of years, the library for far longer. During lockdown, myself and Hannah Barker decided that it would be good to bring the institute and the library even closer together, repurposing all of our activity towards principally the public engagement with research. It does provide, I think, a unified focus for both library and academic staff working together. And this is very much not a kind of setting where library staff, I think, feel they're supporting academic scholarship. In many cases, it's a genuine partnership where library staff are part of and delivering and discovering new scholarship as on an equal footing, as Chris Smith was talking about, on an equal footing to academics. We reach out across the world, and this is just a short list of some of the libraries that we fund joint research fellowships with the Library of Congress, the Huntington, Newbury in Chicago, and the Folger Library. And we have many other connections around the world, principally with Harvard Libraries, Stanford Libraries, the University of Toronto, and the Chinese University of Hong Kong. There was a very interesting discussion at the keynote session this morning about interdisciplinarity, and this is certainly where we pitch the role of the library in the work of the university, and we do aim to bring the Rylands to the same kind of international focus that one may have seen in some of those libraries in the previous bullet, or in elite institutions in North America. Our libraries and academic staff work together, and perhaps from last week, even more closely together on delivering research impact for the REF in a UK setting, on research-based teaching and on collections-based research. We genuinely hope that we do foster an inclusive research and work environment. We also have in our special collections team a team of staff running the Ahmed Iqbal Ullah Race Centre, which I think is unique in the UK, which is a special collections and library department looking at engaging with our BAME communities across the city of Manchester. So far, we've taken oral histories from over 250,000 families across Manchester into that race archive. So we're looking at obviously diversity and decolonisation across our collections, but also looking at the future of what we should be collecting, with the really close partnership of the Institute and almost 100 academics dedicated to that Institute, and over 100 special collections staff. We feel that we're able to realise funding not just through external bodies and individuals, but also through philanthropic donors, creating a critical mass in many areas that we're working in, and also using the library's endowments programme to maximise potential. In that sense, the Rylands Next Chapter project, forgive the pun, is a major next stage of development for our building, where we'll be optimising space. We'll be building brand new exhibition spaces supported by Manchester Digital Collections Online, which many of you will have seen, which is a partnership with the University of Cambridge. And we'll be looking to really focus what was originally a gift to the city of Manchester in the John Rylands Library itself, to continue to be a public-facing library facility, but also to ensure that that public are engaging fully with research and teaching at the university. So finally, just a couple of facts. We should say, welcome 350,000 people every year into our library and into our exhibitions. We have a very large schools programme across Manchester, not just from the John Rylands, but from other special collections teams in other libraries at the university. And of course, since 1903, Manchester University Press has also published the bulletin of the John Rylands Library, and we'll be looking at the role and purpose of that going forward. So finally, in terms of our collections reach, breadth and conservation, this will be very familiar to many of you running collections on this webinar, but we do really strive to make our collections accessible. We obviously embrace the digital shift. We work to develop our collections further through joint research projects to support new fields of scholarship and to document contemporary societies and cultures, as I was mentioning before. We do also feel that an important role of libraries is to do some pioneering work now on born digital archives, and we have a major project funded by Mellon with Manchester, Harvard and Stanford on our email archives. So thank you for your time. Hopefully there will be more time during the Q&A. And just to leave you with a picture of a library which I've not seen for 1 year today. It was the 17th of March 2020 when I last saw this fantastic building. So not only is it St. Patrick's Day, a day which is meant to celebrate the future, but also we need to be really mindful, I think, today of what we need to care for, these are not things that we've lost. There may be things that we need to do differently in the future, and hopefully this project will help us to think through some of those options. Thank you.
I'm just going to follow on from what Sarah said, and I'm going to talk through some of the early observations from the interviews that we're doing. And I was a little bit uncomfortable with it even being billed as findings, because this is research that's still going on. And if you like, I've taken a very, very high level view of some things that are emerging, which may change. So the beauty of this is, if you feel that there's things that we are not picking up, well, there's the opportunity to put that right, have your view. What we've done is we've spoke to a range of stakeholders, and we're still continuing to do so. So this includes funders, library leaders, library staff that have been involved in projects in some way, academics, university leaders, and research facilitators. So we wanted to kind of get a broad view of what was going on and what were some of the issues. In this short presentation, I've just picked out two kind of broad topics that are coming out, which are around challenges and enabling factors. And I just want to be clear that, again, with the health warning, that this is just where we were at the time, and it may have changed by now, but I think these topics could emerge further. They could change slightly, but I think they're useful to consider, and I'd hope to get your views as we go into the panel discussion. So the first sort of set of challenges I see are really around awareness and perceptions. And of course, these are really powerful challenges, because obviously what we perceive and believe, we behave in response to. And I think one of them is around the interpretation of research. Obviously, collections-based research is huge in research libraries, but there is some notion that perhaps we're not thinking beyond that in terms of what research could be. And these perceptions aren't just from one group of stakeholders. So it may be that this is how other people see libraries, just based around collection-based research. But if we think about the definition of research as contribution to original knowledge, collaboration in order to do so, that kind of widens things up, and we have the whole notion of digital scholarship. But it could be even more than that. So there can be some element that the perceptions of what we mean by research may actually limit what people are doing. The next point here is around, image isn't really the word, I don't think, but basically the status, and this has started to come out. So in terms of how academics may perceive librarians or library staff as partners, perhaps there is an element of an academic hierarchy, as somebody put it, where that needs to be challenged. Perhaps there's also the notion that perhaps library staff are not pushing themselves forward enough to be recognised, because they are obviously working on projects, but how do they get that recognition, whether that's in terms of actually funding or other forms of recognition. The other point, again, and these are all intertwined, is really the perception of what is the library. You know, is it just the storehouse of materials? And obviously I'm speaking to an audience where that will take rather a lot of offence to that, but we're talking about perceptions from a range of stakeholders. So if that is one way that the library is perceived, that's going to obviously affect opportunities for collaboration. Also looking at where the boundary is between what a library is doing as business as usual, or whether it's doing something extra that is research. It's something that's kind of emerging but needs to be explored a bit more. My next point here is about some of the elements of funding. So particularly in terms of research council funding, from speaking to people, there seems to be some lack of clarity, confusion over who can apply, who can be a PI, who can be a co-I. And some of this is around the eligibility criteria. So for example, research councils, it's doctorate or equivalent. And I think that equivalent gets ignored or not really delved into or not understood as much. Likewise with experience, traditionally it may be seen as lots and lots of peer-reviewed academic papers. However, other things can be considered. And I think that's a barrier where more awareness, more work can be done to overcome that. The other thing here really is about competition and collaboration, and we're looking at this from a collaborative perspective, echoing what Jane said earlier. However, there can be a potential barrier of, if we're talking about funded research, if we have a finite pool of funding and more library staff are bidding for that funding, is that actually turning into competition? So how do we get the message around collaboration across? How do we manage those expectations? Another set of challenges are around what I've termed support and skills. So what we've been finding is the level of research support for libraries, it varies drastically. So there are some very fortunate places with their own research support in-house, which I'd be extremely envious of. And then there are others without that. And I think perhaps less, as academic departments do have very formal structures for this, libraries can sometimes fit through the gaps and not kind of have that formal structure. And I think from the other side, then possibly the research support function may not understand libraries in terms of costed research in the way that they may understand academics. Costing is another point that's come up in some cases, and this is to be explored further, but there's definitely some notion of grey areas around what can be costed when you're considering library staff involved in funded bids. So this has ranged from concerns about double counting, for example, with full economic costs. Library as a service is already part of the overhead. So what happens if you cost other people in on top of that? Also, can certain types of contracts preclude being costed into bids in certain ways? So these are, again, perceptual things that maybe need to be addressed. Linking in with this is time and the management of time. So time to put bids together, to work up projects, which I think anybody has that as a constraint, but also managing time. So for example, if somebody ends up with a huge research project, how do they manage that around other work that they've got to do? Is it people bought out, post backfilled? So all those structures can not be clear in some cases. Going back to some of the points Sarah made around skills, and this is something that we'll be looking into in more detail as we get more feedback. But again, maybe perceptual, it may be real, around some of the skills to deliver research projects and also some of the skills for the future. So I guess if we're talking about, say, funded research, for example, as with anybody, it's having the skills to come up with an idea that is going to be relevant and also deliver the project through to beginning and end and beyond. The other point I've got there is about opening up collections, and this has been raised by a lot of people, and it's about all the curatorial work that needs to be done in order to work with collections for research. And I think that again is important. It's not everything. So I think going back to the previous points, the notion that library staff can be involved in research if they don't come from an institution with a special collection, it's still an option, it's still part of research, but it may be a perception or that needs to be challenged. And I think another few things that are coming up are kind of what's in it for me, and that's really from a variety of perspectives. So what's in it for me from an academic perspective? What's in it for me from a library perspective? Why should we be doing this? Now that may sound really obvious why we should be doing it, but perhaps it's not to some people. Linked to that is issues around recognition, reward. Obviously, in traditional academic roles, promotion, etc., is research performance is very much linked to that. So there's obviously a reward mechanism there, but it's less clear with library staff, and maybe that's something that needs to be looked at. And I think really overarching all of this is the level of institutional support for library staff to be involved in research. With many competing priorities, what's the expectation, what's the priority for institutions to support this, to work to overcome some of these potential barriers and challenges? What I'm going to do now is just look at some enabling factors, and these are not recommendations, these are really suggestions that have come out from speaking to people, so please take them as a pinch of salt. But I guess the first one around involvement is really, in order to collaborate, we need to know what's going on and where the opportunities to collaborate are. So ideas around improving networking between academics and library staff, inputting into collaborative research agendas, things like that can help involvement in that way. Skills and knowledge, so I think that's investigating whether there is a skills gap and to what extent and how that could be filled. Advocacy and awareness, well, I think one of the things that has come through, it would be useful for people to see examples of what could be done. Obviously, we've had Chris today with an example of what could be done, but there could be more of that are showcased so they can inspire people and people can see what's possible. I think awareness and maybe demystifying some of the things around eligibility for funding, costing, etc., could be worked on. In terms of roles and motivation, well, that's really about how do we reward people for involvement in research? What are our expectations around that? Support, well, that goes back to, do we provide sufficient support for library staff when we're bidding for projects, when we're delivering projects? Is that there? Is it right? Collections, again, that's funding to do the work, to curate, to open up those collections for further research. And finally, some of the opportunities that have been suggested would be funding a specific call for collaborative projects between academics and library staff in order to develop more examples of good practice to showcase things. And I think another opportunity is the technicians' commitment, taking that seriously. And from my impression from speaking to funders so far is that it's been really positive in terms of their attitude, perceptions towards library staff being involved in research. And to an extent on that side, it feels like it might be pushing somewhat of an open door. However, there are a lot of challenges in other ways to be looked at. So, as I say, extremely impressionistic at this time. We are just about halfway through the interviews now. I put this together before we were halfway through, and this isn't a detailed analysis by any way, but hopefully will give you some food for thought, maybe inspire you to take part in the research, and hopefully contribute to our conversation later. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'd be really grateful. We've got a couple of questions based around what we've presented that we'd really like to get your view on. And I don't know, Mel, if you could help us out there. Excellent, thank you. Right, so yeah, this first one really is about some of those perceptual barriers and how significant you actually experience them to be. And I should say that when I'm talking about these barriers, they may take on different significance depending on where you are in the organisation. So we have had examples of people further, in more junior roles experiencing more procedural barriers, if you like, than somebody higher up. And I think we need to bear that in mind. So this is kind of important and interesting that the sort of image, the status of library staff there is seen as the most significant barrier there, which is definitely important.
Hey, we've only got 60. We're getting the numbers up. We've got 155 people. So if you can encourage people to vote, I think that would be good. It'd be nice to get it up to at least 100. Slow but sure.
Yeah, please do. Just checking out the chat. Let's have a look what's coming up. Well, it still seems to be around that same kind of distribution.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important and really interesting that, you know, it's perhaps around perceptions that where some of the key challenges are here.
If our panelists, Jane and Tao, who's joined us, Tao Chang, head of infrastructure at the AHRC, would like to come in and begin comment, and we'll move into the conversazione, as I call it. Oh. And Darryl Green. Darryl, you're head of special collections at the University of Edinburgh and co-convener of RLUK Special Collections Leadership Network. And obviously to have Sarah and Pete on standby there. But let's keep going on these Mentimeter questions. Pete, do you want? We're up to 92. Shall we move on to the next one?
And we've got one more, which is really around. So that's really interesting. Thank you for that. And we've got one more, which is really around the enabling factors. So again, I've kind of categorized them fairly crudely from what we've got so far. But that doesn't surprise me. It seemed to me from the conversations that were emerging that without institutional support, this is going to be pretty difficult. So yeah, that kind of echoes that. And also then the opportunities to get involved, being able to have those conversations, be involved in shaping that dialogue. So that's really interesting. Thank you.
Pete, could I just add in there something that came up at the town halls, which is that institutional support needs to be right across the institution, because there was quite a lot of anecdotal evidence about people who had support from within their library, but as soon as they come into contact with the research office, then they hit another set of barriers there, and the different parts of the institution don't always talk to each other. So it really needed to be institutional support across the institution in all areas that are affecting research. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Jane. And so it's that top down, isn't it? How it can be joined up to facilitate this. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that looks really, really interesting, and it's useful to have this to you know, test out some of the things that are coming out so far.